The massive crystalline spires of the Nixian diplomatic vessel loomed over the United Earth Embassy like frozen daggers catching starlight. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the viewport, watching the sharp angles and pristine geometries with a mixture of awe and apprehension. After 6 months of delicate negotiations through quantum communications, the Nixian High Command had finally agreed to face-to-face talks. They're requesting permission to dock, Ambassador, Lieutenant Rivera reported from his station. Their biosignatures match our preliminary scans. 20 warriors, all female, as expected. Sarah smoothed down her formal diplomatic attire, a simple black suit that felt inadequate compared to the elaborate armor she'd seen in the preliminary video exchanges. Grant them clearance. And remember everyone. No sudden movements, no unauthorized communications, and absolutely no weapons. The Nixians consider armed males to be a capital offense. The docking procedure was precise, almost mechanical in its execution. Sarah watched through the internal feeds as the Nixian delegation emerged from their ship. Tall, statuesque figures with iridescent scaled skin in shades of deep purple and midnight blue. Their ceremonial armor seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating the impression of moving shadows. High Commander Vexera led the procession, her head held high beneath a crown of crystalline spines that marked her rank. Her face was a study in controlled severity, every movement measured and deliberate. The other warriors followed in perfect formation, their boot steps falling in eerie synchronization. Sarah met them in the grand reception hall, bowing precisely to the depth specified in the preliminary protocols. High Commander, we welcome you to Earth's embassy. I am Ambassador Chen, appointed representative of the United Earth Government. Vexera's solid silver eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made the human diplomat feel like she was being dissected. Your transmission protocols were adequate, Ambassador Chen. We will proceed with the evaluation of your species' worthiness for trade relations. The High Commander's voice had a metallic resonance that seemed to vibrate through Sarah's bones. She maintained her diplomatic smile, despite the chill running down her spine. We are honored by your consideration. Please, allow me to show you to the conference chamber. As they walked the corridors, Sarah noticed how the Nixian warriors studied everything with predatory focus. Their species had emerged from the far reaches of the galaxy 6 months ago, already possessing technology centuries ahead of humanity's capabilities. Their warships could crack planets, their energy shields laughed at nuclear weapons, and their society had apparently conquered death itself through crystalline consciousness transfer. The only reason they hadn't simply taken what they wanted from Earth was their rigid adherence to their ancient codes of conduct. The Nixians believed in proving worthiness through proper channels. It was the only thing keeping humanity in the game. In the conference chamber, the warriors arranged themselves in a precise ceremonial pattern, with Vexera at the apex. Sarah took her position at the opposite end of the long table, acutely aware that she was the only human permitted in the room. The stakes couldn't be higher. Humanity needed access to Nixian technology to survive the emerging threats from deep space. You will begin by explaining why your species deserves consideration, Vexera stated, her tone making it clear she already doubted any answer would be sufficient. Sarah drew a careful breath. High Commander, humanity may be young compared to your civilization, but we have demonstrated remarkable adaptability and innovation. Our technological progress in the last century alone. We have reviewed your technological achievements, Vexera interrupted. They are primitive. What else? Perhaps then, Sarah continued smoothly, we should discuss our cultural achievements. Our art, our music, our ability to find joy and beauty even in darkness. The slight shift in Vexera's posture was the only warning before her voice cut through the air like a blade. Joy, beauty. These are weaknesses. We have evolved beyond such frivolous considerations. The strong survive. The weak perish. This is the only truth that matters. Sarah felt her carefully prepared arguments crumbling. Everything in the cultural briefings suggested the Nixians valued strength above all. But facing their cold dismissal in person was different. These weren't just stern warriors. They were beings who had systematically stripped away everything they considered unnecessary, including emotions themselves. As she looked at their impassive faces, Sarah realized that humanity's greatest strength might also be what the Nixians considered their greatest weakness. They had engineered themselves into perfect living weapons, and here she was preparing to tell them about Shakespeare and symphony orchestras. The first contact was not going as planned, but Sarah Chen had not become Earth's youngest senior diplomat by giving up easily. As Vexera's silver eyes bored into her, Sarah began to formulate a new approach. If the Nixians wanted to see strength, perhaps it was time to show them a different kind of power, one they had forgotten existed. 3 days into the negotiations, Sarah found herself studying security footage of the Nixian warriors during their off hours. The aliens maintained their rigid discipline even in private, performing precise exercise routines and reviewing tactical data with mechanical efficiency. But it was the youngest warrior, Sub-Commander Lixera, who caught Sarah's attention. When she thought no one was watching, Lixera would sometimes pause at the embassy's windows, her silver eyes tracking the flight of birds or the dance of leaves in the wind. These moments of curiosity were tiny cracks in the perfect Nixian facade, and Sarah intended to exploit them. "You requested a private audience, Ambassador." High Commander Vexera's voice echoed through the meeting chamber. She stood alone, her crystalline crown catching the afternoon light. Sarah nodded, activating the privacy fields. "High Commander, I've been reviewing our discussions about strength and survival. I believe I understand now why you find humanity's emotional nature so concerning." Vexera's scaled face remained impassive, but Sarah detected a slight tilt of interest in her posture. "Explain." "Your species achieved technological supremacy by eliminating what you saw as weaknesses. Emotions, creativity, spontaneity, all sacrificed in pursuit of perfect order. It worked brilliantly." Sarah moved closer, careful to maintain the exact formal distance required by protocol. "But tell me, High Commander, why do your younger warriors still show signs of curiosity?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "You overstep, Ambassador." "Do I? Or have I simply noticed what you've been trying to ignore? Your perfect system has a flaw. Each generation of Nixians requires more intensive conditioning to suppress their natural instincts. You're not evolving. You're fighting a losing battle against your own nature." Vexera's hand twitched toward her ceremonial blade, but protocol prevented her from drawing it. "You dare to suggest weakness in our ways." "Not weakness," Sarah countered. "Change. Evolution. The very force that drove your species to greatness is still at work, whether you acknowledge it or not. I've seen Sub-Commander Lixera watch Earth's sunsets. I've noticed others studying our art with more than tactical assessment." "Lixera will be disciplined," Vexera stated coldly. "Will that solve the problem? Or will it just drive the curiosity deeper underground, where it festers and grows stronger?" Sarah pressed her advantage. "Your own historical records show that your society wasn't always like this. The Great Purge of Emotions was a response to a crisis 10,000 years ago. It saved your species then, but now it's becoming a cage." The High Commander's silver eyes narrowed. "You have accessed restricted historical data. You gave us access to your cultural database as part of the diplomatic exchange. I simply read it carefully." Sarah smiled slightly. "Another human weakness. We're insatiably curious." Vexera stood perfectly still for several long moments. When she spoke, her voice carried a new undertone, something almost like uncertainty. "The old ways preserved us through the dark times. Without absolute discipline, we would have fallen to the Void Hunters. Every warrior knows this. The Void Hunters are long gone, Commander. You've grown so powerful that no external force threatens you anymore. But perhaps something internal does. The weight of all those suppressed emotions, building up over generations like pressure in a sealed container." "These discussions are pointless," Vexera declared, but she didn't leave. "Our ways have served us for 10 millennia. Sarah took a calculated risk. Then why did you really come to Earth? Your technology is vastly superior. You don't need trade relations with us. But something drew you here, perhaps the same thing that makes your young warriors stare at sunsets, a hunger for something you've lost. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could almost see the conflict behind Vexera's metallic eyes. The perfect warrior battling with something older, something that had been buried but never truly died. Finally, the High Commander spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. There are discussions among the Elder Council, concerns about recent developments in our younger generations. Some suggest our path may need adjustment. It was the first crack in the wall, and Sarah knew she had to tread carefully. Perhaps that's why you were chosen for this mission, Commander. Not just to evaluate humanity's worthiness, but to explore alternatives to the absolute suppression of emotion. Such speculation is dangerous, Ambassador. Less dangerous than pretending nothing is changing, Sarah countered. Your warriors are starting to remember what it means to feel, Commander. The only question is whether you'll help guide that awakening or try to crush it until it explodes. Vexera turned to leave, then paused. There will be resistance. The traditionalists will not accept change easily. Change never comes easily, Sarah agreed. But it comes all the same. The question is whether we face it with wisdom or denial. As the High Commander left the chamber, her steps were less precise than usual, her perfect posture showing the slightest hint of contemplation. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The walls were beginning to crack, but the real challenge lay ahead. The weight of 10,000 years of tradition wouldn't be lifted easily, and those who clung to the old ways would not surrender without a fight. The diplomatic dinner was a disaster before it even began. The Nixian warriors stood rigid around the grand table, eyeing the elaborate Earth cuisine with barely concealed suspicion. Sarah had spent weeks planning this event, hoping to showcase humanity's creativity through culinary arts. Now, watching the warriors examine each dish like they were searching for concealed weapons, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. These items have been analyzed for toxins, High Commander Vexera inquired, her silver eyes fixed on a perfectly crafted souffle. Thoroughly, Sarah assured her. Though I should warn you about the wasabi. It's not toxic, but... She didn't get to finish her warning. Sub-Commander Lixera, perhaps trying to demonstrate courage, had already scooped up a significant portion of the green paste and consumed it whole. The young warrior's eyes widened dramatically, her scaled skin flushing a brilliant shade of indigo. Steam seemed to pour from her ears as she desperately maintained her stoic expression. The moment hung in perfect silence. Then, from somewhere in the back of the Nixian delegation, came a sound that had never been heard in recorded Nixian history, a snort of suppressed laughter. Every head turned toward Sub-Commander Kexti, a usually unremarkable warrior who now stood with her hands clamped over her mouth, shoulders shaking with barely contained mirth. The sight of her usually composed comrade turning various shades of purple while trying to pretend nothing was wrong had cracked something in her that 10,000 years of conditioning couldn't contain. Sub-Commander Kexti, Vexera's voice cut through the air like a blade. You forget yourself. But it was too late. The sound had awakened something. Other warriors were struggling now, their perfect composure cracking as Lixera continued to turn interesting colors. Even Vexera's face seemed to be twitching, though she fought it with all her considerable will. Sarah, recognizing the pivotal moment, did something either very brave or very foolish. She laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine warmth and shared amusement. I'm so sorry, Sub-Commander Lixera. I really should have warned you sooner. Water helps, by the way. Lixera grabbed her water glass with decidedly unprofessional haste, downing it in one very unwarrior-like gulp. This proved too much for Kexti, who finally broke into full-throated laughter. The sound was strange, almost rusty, as if long unused machinery was starting up again. One by one, other warriors began to succumb. It started as twitches and snorts, then evolved into genuine laughter. The sound was alien but unmistakable, joy breaking through centuries of suppression like flowers cracking through concrete. kYeah stood amid the chaos, her face a battlefield of warring emotions. This is. She couldn't seem to find the words as her own composure began to crack. A small snort escaped her, which only made her look more horrified, which in turn made her warriors laugh harder. This is perfectly natural, Sarah supplied gently. This is what happens when you try to bottle up something essential to your nature. Sometimes it just bursts out. The High Commander sank into her chair, a very un-High Commander-like gesture. In 10,000 years of recorded history, there has never been such a display. Then perhaps it's long overdue, Sarah suggested. Look at your warriors, Commander. Really look at them. The Nixian warriors were transformed. Their perfect posture had relaxed, their faces animated with an emotion many of them had never experienced before. They looked younger, more alive. Even as they began to regain control, something fundamental had changed. They had remembered how to feel joy. The council will not be pleased, kYeah muttered, but Sarah noticed she made no move to discipline her warriors. The council isn't here, Sarah pointed out. But you are. And you've just witnessed something remarkable, not weakness, but strength. The strength to break free from constraints that no longer serve their purpose. kYeah, her color finally returning to normal, spoke up. High Commander, I feel strange, but not unpleasant. It's as if something tight in my chest has loosened. That's called relief, Sarah explained. It's what happens when you finally let go of something you've been holding onto too tightly. It is most irregular, kYeah declared, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. She touched her own chest, as if feeling for something different there. Irregular doesn't always mean wrong, Sarah pressed gently. Your ancestors chose to suppress emotions because they needed to survive a terrible threat. But suppressing something doesn't make it go away, it just builds up pressure until it finds a way out. Sometimes through laughter, sometimes through less pleasant means. The dinner continued, but everything had shifted. The warriors ate with more curiosity now, their conversations punctuated by occasional chuckles as they remembered kYeah's expression. They were different people than they had been an hour ago, or perhaps they were finally becoming themselves again. As Sarah watched them, she knew this was just the beginning. The laughter had cracked open a door that had been sealed for millennia, and no amount of discipline would fully close it again. The real challenge would come when word of this reached the council, when the traditionalists realized their perfect system was beginning to unravel. But for now, in this moment, she watched a civilization remember how to smile, and knew that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with a shout, but with a laugh. News of the laughter incident spread through the Nixian fleet like wildfire. Try as they might to suppress it, the story of warriors laughing at a diplomatic dinner became the most discussed secret in their history. Encrypted communications buzzed between ships, warriors whispered in corridors, and for the first time in millennia, the impenetrable facade of Nixian society began to show cracks. Sarah watched it unfold through careful observation and the intelligence reports that crossed her desk. More Nixian ships had arrived in Earth's orbit, officially for cultural observation. Their crews found endless excuses to visit the embassy, their silver eyes drinking in human interactions with barely concealed fascination. They're calling it a contamination, kYeah informed Sarah during one of their now frequent private meetings. The High Commander had changed subtly since the dinner. Her posture was still perfect, her voice still commanding. But there was something new in her eyes, a spark of life that hadn't been there before. And what do you call it? Sarah asked, pouring tea for both of them. Another small rebellion against protocol. kYeah considered the steaming cup before her, an awakening, perhaps, or a remembering. Our youngest warriors. They're different now. They ask questions. They watch sunsets. Yesterday, I found Sub-Commander kYeah attempting to create what she called art. How terrible, Sarah said with a slight smile. And the council? They've called an emergency session. The traditionalist faction demands immediate withdrawal from Earth space and a purge of all affected personnel. Vexera's scaled fingers tapped against the teacup. But they face unexpected resistance. Many of our ship captains are refusing to acknowledge the order. Sarah leaned forward. Because they've started to remember too. Because their crews would mutiny if they tried to leave. Vexera's admission seemed to surprise even her. Do you understand what that means, Ambassador? Nixian warriors contemplating mutiny. It's unprecedented. 10,000 years of perfect discipline. And now they're becoming people again. Sarah completed softly. Living, feeling beings instead of perfect machines. A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the chamber's windows, they could see a group of young warriors in the embassy's garden, gathered around something. Vexera strode to the window. Sarah, close behind. Sub-Commander Lixera stood in the center of the group, manipulating light with her ceremonial crystals to create dancing patterns in the air. It was crude art by human standards, but the expressions on the watching warriors' faces were pure wonder. One of them reached out to touch a light pattern and jerked back in surprise when it changed color at her touch. Unauthorized use of ceremonial crystals, Vexera murmured. Another violation of protocol. But she made no move to stop it. They're rediscovering play, Sarah observed, like children finding toys they never knew they had. We are warriors, Vexera protested, but her voice lacked conviction. We are. She trailed off as one of the light patterns formed into the shape of a flowering tree, its luminous petals scattering in an invisible wind. Sarah watched the High Commander's face carefully. You know, humans have a saying. The opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation. Before Vexera could respond, her communication crystal pulsed an urgent red. Her face darkened as she received the message. The traditionalist faction has made their move. They're dispatching the First Fleet, under the command of High Executor Mixera. Your sister, Sarah remembered from the intelligence briefings. The one who led the last purge 50 years ago, yes. Vexera's voice was heavy. She will not show mercy, even to her own blood. Especially not to her own blood. The First Fleet carries enough firepower to reduce this entire system to ash. Sarah felt her heart rate spike, but kept her voice steady. And what do you intend to do about it? Vexera turned from the window, her silver eyes meeting Sarah's with newfound intensity. What I must. What I should have done 50 years ago, when she murdered our youngest sister for the crime of crying at our mother's death ceremony. She straightened to her full height. Ambassador Chen, I formally request Earth's assistance in protecting something far more precious than protocol. The soul of my people. Outside, oblivious to the approaching storm, young warriors continued to paint with light, their laughter carrying through the embassy gardens. They had tasted freedom, remembered joy, rediscovered their capacity for wonder. Sarah knew humanity could no more abandon them than they could choose to forget their own awakening. Well, she said, allowing herself a grim smile, I suppose it's time to show the traditionalists that emotions aren't the only thing humans are good at. Shall we plan a proper welcome for your sister? In orbit above them, sensors detected the first ripples of approaching ships dropping out of hyperspace. The First Fleet was coming, bringing with it all the cold certainty of 10,000 years of emotional death. But they would find a very different Nixian society waiting for them, one that had remembered how to feel, how to create, and most importantly, how to fight for something more precious than mere survival. The First Fleet emerged from hyperspace like a wall of living shadow, 50 ships of crystalline darkness that seemed to devour the starlight around them. On the embassy's command deck, Sarah watched the tactical display with High Commander Vexera and her transformed warriors. The next few hours would determine not just the fate of Earth, but the future of Nixian civilization itself. High Executor Mixera demands our immediate surrender and submission to purification protocols. Lieutenant Rivera reported, his voice tight. She's broadcasting visual. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a face so similar to Vexera's yet utterly different. Where Vexera had begun to show signs of life, High Executor kYeah was a statue carved from living crystal, her silver eyes as dead as ancient stars. Sister, kYeah's voice held no trace of familial warmth. You disappoint our ancestors. Surrender your command and prepare your warriors for cleansing. The human corruption must be purged. kYeah straightened, and Sarah saw something new in her posture, not just the rigid discipline of a warrior, but the strength of someone who had found something worth fighting for. No, sister, we will not surrender, and we will not return to the darkness. We remember now, we feel now, and we choose life. Then you choose extinction. kYeah's image vanished, and the First Fleet began to move. What followed was unlike any battle in Earth's history. The Nixian ships under kYeah's command were outnumbered 3-1, but they fought with a passion that their opponents couldn't comprehend. The traditional formations of the First Fleet were met with improvised maneuvers that no proper Nixian would ever conceive, born from the newly awakened creativity of warriors who had remembered how to feel. They're trying to predict our movements using traditional battle algorithms, Lix recalled from her tactical station, her voice almost gleeful. They can't understand why their predictions keep failing. Because they're fighting against machines, Sarah realized aloud, while we have people. The battle raged across the solar system. The First Fleet's superior numbers should have guaranteed victory, but they were fighting opponents who no longer followed the rules. kYeah's warriors had spent months observing humanity, learning about improvisation, about thinking outside rigid patterns. Now they put those lessons to use, their ships dancing through space in ways that defied 10,000 years of military doctrine. But numbers were still numbers. Slowly, inevitably, the First Fleet began to close in. Ships on both sides fell, crystalline hulls shattering like frozen tears across the void. Sarah could see the strain on kYeah's face as she watched her people die on both sides of the conflict. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace. Rivera's voice cut through the tension. They're Nixian vessels, but not First Fleet configuration. New ships appeared across the tactical display. Dozens, then hundreds. The command frequency erupted with voices from across the Empire. Ship captains, squadron leaders, even planetary governors, all declaring their support for kYeah's rebellion of spirit. You see, sister, kYeah broadcast across all frequencies. You're not fighting a small contamination. You're fighting the future. Our people are awakening everywhere. We remember joy. We remember love. We remember what it means to be alive. The High Executor's response was a barrage of energy weapons that lit up space like new suns. But now the weight of numbers had shifted. The First Fleet found itself surrounded by ships commanded by warriors who had also begun to remember, who had heard about the laughter and chosen to embrace change rather than fear it. In the end, it wasn't superior firepower or tactical brilliance that decided the battle. It was a simple transmission, broadcast from a small ship at the edge of the conflict. A young Nixian voice, singing an ancient lullaby that hadn't been heard in 10,000 years. The song spread from ship to ship, warriors remembering words their ancestors had forbidden, melodies that had survived in racial memory through centuries of suppression. Sarah watched kYeah's face as the song filled the command deck. A single crystal tear traced down the High Commander's scaled cheek, the first tear shed by a Nixian leader in 10 millennia. On the tactical display, First Fleet ships began powering down their weapons. Warriors across the fleet were remembering, awakening, choosing to lay down arms rather than fight against their own renaissance. Even High Executor kYeah's flagship eventually fell silent, though no surrender was transmitted. Hours later, in the aftermath of what would become known as the Battle of Remembered Joy, Sarah stood with kYeah in the embassy garden. Young warriors were again creating light sculptures, but now they shaped them into memorial patterns for those lost in the battle, mixing ancient Nixian symbols with new emotional interpretations. It will not be easy, kYeah said softly. 10,000 years of conditioning cannot be undone in a day. There will be resistance, confusion, fear of change. But you'll face it together, Sarah replied. not as perfect warriors, but as living, feeling beings who can learn and grow and create. She paused, then asked, "What about your sister?" kYeah has requested rehabilitation. She heard the song too, though she fought against it. Some memories run too deep to deny forever. kYeah turned to Sarah, her silver eyes now bright with life. "Your people taught us how to laugh again, Ambassador. Now we must learn how to live." Above them, Earth's sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that dozens of Nixian warriors now openly admired. Their empire would never be the same. They would build something new, something that preserved their strength while embracing the full spectrum of life that they had denied for so long. And it had all started with a laugh, a simple moment of joy that cracked a shell 10,000 years thick. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the greatest victories come not through force of arms, but through the courage to remember what it means to be truly alive.